My favorite unlikely real estate icon is the hermit crab. You were like, which realtor is she gonna call out? The hermit crab. The hermit crab has a fascinating approach to real estate. Hermit crabs engage in something that marine biologists and economists alike call vacancy chains. Meaning that when a hermit crab needs a new shell because it's grown too big for the one it's got now, and it stumbles upon an empty shell, it checks it out, leaves the old shell behind, and a new hermit crab comes and checks out their abandoned shell and occupies it. And sometimes that happens asynchronously, where it, over the course of a day or so, hermit crabs in a tide pool will swing through and check out the latest shell in town, but sometimes they engage in synchronous vacancy chains. They all show up together and swap around to make sure that everyone has the shell that they need. Take what you need, leave what you can. That's the motto of a series of local food mutual aid outposts called Hope Fridge. There's one in Menasha and one in Oshkosh, and Hope Fridge doesn't operate on grants, and you don't have to sign in, you don't have to sign up, you don't have to fill out paperwork, whether to donate or to get food. If you have leftover chili and you put it in 5 containers, you can leave it in the Hope Fridge. If you bought far too many boxes of Girl Scout cookies, not that I would know anyone like that, you can leave them in the Hope Fridge, and someone who is hungry can show up and take what they need. And that's the base of their philosophy of mutual aid, is that. Take what you need. Leave what you can. February is Black History Month, which means that we have all spent the last few weeks seeing the primary fodder of Black History Month in our world, it seems, which is, of course, out of context Martin Luther King Jr. quotes. In unexpected places. You never know who's going to offer an out of context Martin Luther King Jr. quote. The one that Unitarian Universalists, in my experience, like to take out of context the most is this one. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. And I'm guilty of it too. We think of it as expressing something true about universalism, about shared destiny in this giant cosmological sense. But that quote is from King's letter from Birmingham jail. And the paragraph that it's in is not about our salvation destiny in the afterlife. It's from a paragraph about outside agitators. King is using it to argue that he is not an outside agitator in Birmingham, even though he lives in Georgia. He's not an outside agitator because we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. It's not just a statement about theology or mystical interdependence, it's a statement about politics, about how we show up for one another and whose concerns are our concerns, not just in a mythic sense, but in a real, lived, day-to-day organizing sense. All thriving is mutual. And that over time, King's approach to that idea that all thriving is mutual expanded and deepened his analysis of all economic thriving being mutual. Just a couple weeks before his assassination, he was speaking to an audience about the sanitation workers' strike. And he said this: If America does not use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty and make it possible for all of God's children to have the basic necessities of life, she too will go to hell. Do you ever hear a quote from the past and wish it were less true? Yes, that if we do not use our vast resources of wealth to do something about those who don't have enough, we will all suffer the consequences. And that has played out time and time again, and as I've been thinking about it, it sparked in my mind, many Black radical movements in our country have had economic dimensions. I thought about how in 1969, the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California, started a free breakfast program because their platform of self-determination and practices of freedom wouldn't succeed if every Black kid in Oakland showed up hungry to school. And the program had spread to 36 cities 2 years later. And our friends at the FBI viewed this program as one of the Black Panthers' most threatening activities. Genuinely, that one of the most threatening things they were doing was feeding children breakfast. Because it built community buy-in. Because they were meeting people in their need. And the FBI worked to dismantle and destabilize the Black Panther Party. And it wasn't then until the mid-'70s that the government itself started a free breakfast program, in part because they were concerned that entities like the Black Panther Party were going to get so much buy-in from people that it would be destabilizing if people saw that the community could show up for itself in that way. Meeting people in their need, not fixing, not telling them about the political position they ought to have, but just meeting someone in their need, right, that is enormously powerful. Showing up with the framework that our thriving is shared. Take what you need. Leave what you can. Over the past month or so here at the Fellowship, we've had a noticeable uptick in requests from our ministers' discretionary fund, both from people within this community who are feeling economic impacts piling up, and from people within our wider circle of care, not strangers exactly, but trusted community partners coming to us and saying, this vulnerable person has exhausted every other resource out there. They're about to lose their housing, or their car, or an essential life-saving medication. Is there anything you can do? And of course, there isn't really anything that I alone can do. But one of the great privileges in my work here is that you all have given resources again and again and again to a discretionary fund that lets Reverend Christina and me meet these folks in their moment of need and say yes. Yes to a mortgage payment, a car registration, some groceries, a hospital bill. And though we are the ones who write the check, these gifts are only possible because you all have given what you can, again and again and again. Your ministry, our ministry, reaches people and places in our community that you will never know about. And it reminds me of another story that Robin Wall Kimmerer tells in her essay about the serviceberry, about an anthropologist who goes to study an indigenous community in Brazil, and a hunter who has brought home a large kill, which he then shares with the whole community by throwing a feast. And when the anthropologist asks the hunter why hasn't he stored the meat by preserving it, the hunter responds that he is storing the meat in the belly of his brother. Kimmerer goes on to write, "There beats the heart of gift economies, an antecedent alternative to market economies, another way of organizing ourselves to sustain life. In a gift economy, wealth is understood as having enough to share, and the practice for dealing with abundance is to give it away. In fact, status is determined not by how much one accumulates, but by how much one gives away. The currency in a gift economy is relationship, which is expressed as gratitude, as interdependence, and as ongoing cycles of reciprocity. A gift economy nurtures the community bonds that enhance mutual well-being. The economic unit is we rather than I. All flourishing is mutual." And I feel that here too, for us, for this congregation, where I know that our wealth is not measured by our balance sheet. It's measured by our impact, the reach of our mission, the well-being of our local community, and the relationships we cultivate here. Because ours is a religious community organized around the idea that we is not just an economic or political unit, but a theological, a spiritual one. Not in the sense of uniformity or conformity, but in terms of interdependence. That idea that we are all woven into that single garment of destiny. And it's that orientation that our universalism compels us to live out the truth of our interdependence that led your ministers and board to create a new type of discretionary fund this week. And the details are still unfolding. We're going to share more next week. But we're creating a discretionary fund that is primarily external in focus, mostly meant to be given away to wider community members, people who we do not know. And the impetus of this has come from an emerging network of community and faith leaders working here in the Fox Valley to meet this moment around immigration enforcement and how we will respond. And out of those conversations, it became clear that we needed an institution that was willing to just move monetary mutual aid from people who had it to people who needed it. And I said, I think that's us. Take what you need. Leave what you can. And honestly, we're pretty good as a collective at seeing how that interdependence shows up out there in our social justice ministries, in our political advocacy, our community partnership work. But sometimes we struggle to see how that truth shapes who we are here, inside of our community, with one another, inside of our families, in our own hearts. How that truth of our interdependence expresses itself more intimately. Again and again, I have conversations with you all where you express how difficult it is for you to ask for help when you need it. And as we have discussed earlier this month, I'm right there with you. But you would be astonished how many times people who are in a moment of deep need say to me, "You should save the help for someone who really needs it." How often I have the conversation with one of you that your primary concern as you face an illness or the end of your life is that you're going to be a burden on someone else. And goodness, it's tender. How many times I have conversations with you all where you express how exhausted and depleted you are from caregiving for your children, from your partner, for your parents, for your family members, that you don't know how you're going to keep doing it, because you feel out of resources and resentment has crept in. We are so unresolved in our own hearts about what it means that we are truly interdependent, that we are not burdens on one another, that that's how we're meant to be. I think about the story of Sophia and how with this important guest coming over, it would have been so easy to shut people out and to say, "I'm not answering the door for the mayor. God is coming for tea." But instead, she opens the door. She lets people in, and they bring their fullness to that moment. We need you in your fullness here. Because this community that you see, it has been built over the decades by people who have given what they can. Not once in a while, not when it was convenient, but week in and week out for the last 70 years. The piano, the sound system, the roof over our heads, the coffee maker, the copy machine, the pastor who shows up when you're in the hospital, the RE classrooms, the training for the volunteers. It's all here from 7 decades of people giving what they can. And it exists so that you can take what you need. Because we all need something. And we all have something to offer. Community is a spiritual discipline. But when we struggle to admit that we really need one another, not just in terms of policy positions, but interpersonally, intimately, we need one another. When we can't admit that, it gets in the way of giving what we can because we are still holding on to the idea that individual success is the primary marker of success in our lives. And I know that that is a vulnerable ask. Because when we ask each other to admit that we can't make it through life alone, that means we're asking each other to acknowledge that people might hurt us and disappoint us. And I would maybe even say will hurt us and disappoint us. But y'all, even the hermit crabs know that sometimes you have to leave the protection of your shell to find the next one. You have to expose some of those soft parts of yourself in order to survive. When we give to others, when we offer our performance art, when we give money to the mutual aid fund, when we make a meal for someone who has had knee surgery, when we serve on the board, when we make financial commitments, when we watch someone's kids so they can go to a job interview, even if we give all we have into it, if we do it out of a sense of one-directional charity or obligation, or worse yet, please don't, fee-for-service consumerism, then we miss the deeper truth that all thriving is shared. And that giving and receiving are not linear, but circular, infinite. We don't say, I have love like 6 ounces of water in a cup. I have love like an ocean. And that's a little terrifying, because I'll admit humanity does not always make the best argument for itself as a group to trust with our vulnerabilities. But if we are committed to building a different world, a world that we dream about, I have to say we are building it as we fly it. And if the longing of our hearts is a world where every need is met and there is enough and every person is thriving, then we begin to create it here and now with one another. Take what you need. Leave what you can. May it be so.